This week's 1044 is brought to you by Chevron Delos 600 ADF Ultra Low Ash Diesel Engine Oil. It's time to kick some ash. Transportation is in the decarbonization crosshairs, but some applications are a lot easier to go green than others. What does it all mean for short haul, regional haul, and long haul trucking companies? The 1044 this week takes a look. Hey everybody, welcome to the 1044, a weekly webisode from the editors here at CCJ. I'm Jason Cannon and my co-host on the other side is Matt Cole. The transportation sector is a major source of GHG emissions. It's estimated to account for about 18% of global emissions and 24% of U.S. emissions. Yet the transportation sector, up until a few years ago, had mostly avoided the green energy spotlight as most states and the EPA were mostly satisfied with the industry's embrace of cleaner diesel engines. But all of that's changing.
Regardless of your thoughts on climate change and global warming, there's clearly an intense focus on decarbonization. A shift has been underway in passenger cars for years, driven by the likes of Tesla, Nissan, and Honda. Now, Ford, GM, and pretty much everyone else with an assembly line is hopping on board.
The success of the passenger car industry's transition to zero emissions has put pressure on the heavy-duty segment. But a commercial truck isn't just a means of transportation. And according to Fuels Institute Executive Director John Eichberger, this creates a highly varied market with relatively limited opportunities to scale in zero emissions.
Long-haul cargo represents 40% of the sector's greenhouse gas emissions. So it's viewed as the big dinosaur, the big elephant in the room. And so, if you want to have a meaningful impact on the environment, you attack the largest emission source first. The challenge is, and as we broke it down in the report, that sector is not necessarily going to be easy to apply decarbonization stuff to it because there are certain characteristics that just don't lend itself. First of all, you look at the ownership period. You don't own them very long. So if you invest, $20,000, $30,000 in something, are you going to get your return? So the motivation to do that isn't there. They're long haul. So you're subject to getting your energy source from other parties. You're not going home to a proprietary depot every night to refuel your truck. You need somebody else to provide this solution. So let's say you want to go to natural gas, which a lot of trucks did several years ago. You need retailers to install natural gas fueling facilities. So you're not in control of your destiny. You need other people to go along with you, which is an impediment. A lot of these aren't operating in your typical congested, high pollution markets. So if you're going to be focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, what other benefits come from that? A lot of your more medium-sized vehicles, like your Amazon delivery vans, they're neighborhoods. So if you go electric, they're silent. You eliminate tailpipe emissions. You eliminate certain things that are benefits beyond carbon reduction. You don't really have that for your over-the-road truckers. And then, if you've got hoteling accommodations in the tractor, you need auxiliary energy. And so how are you going to get that if you change the powertrain and the energy source? So those are some of the key things that really make it challenging because if you're focused on reducing carbon, that's great, but you need to have some sort of business element to that as well, which is much more difficult to justify the investment when you have those conditions at play.
Trucking is a highly fragmented business, which is a complicating factor in widespread decarbonization. The industry can't flip a switch to zero emissions without first identifying which zero emissions tech is going to be the winner and enabling infrastructure development. And another consideration is that fleets can take basically the same tractor and spec it dozens of different ways based on their specific needs, leaving no one-size-fits-all solutions.
So if you think about how are you going to reduce carbon? So we need to change the engine, we need to change the fuel. You're going to need the infrastructure. If you're going to go natural gas, you got to build the infrastructure. If you're going to go hydrogen, you got to build the infrastructure. And the fueling industry, they're willing to invest in new technologies if there's demand. And so you have a chicken and egg situation there. Who's going to go first? Do the trucks come first or does the fueling infrastructure come first? So that's a big impediment to any type of change to over-the-road hauling. The other one, you're right, there's so many different variations. And depending on what you're pulling changes your energy needs. So I used to joke a lot when Tesla came out and announced their tractor trailer electric vehicle. I said, okay, who ordered them? Frito-Lay. ordered some trucks. Why? Because potato chips don't weigh anything. So you can take your gross vehicle weight limit, apply it all to the powertrain and energy source, because you're basically pulling air in the trailer. Budweiser, however, and Anheuser-Busch ordered hydrogen fuel cell trucks because the weight of the powertrain was much lower, but the power to weight was higher. Why? Because their trailer carries a lot heavier load. And so you can't take one solution and apply it to all applications.
Last mile and regional haul were identified in a Fuel Institute report as two of the easier applications to decarbonize because they have the benefit of returning to base at the end of the day. And in the case of last mile, it includes vehicles that don't go very far and in many cases have a lighter GVWR. But before we hear more from John, let's hear from 1044 sponsor Chevron Lubricants. Protecting your diesel engine and its after-treatment system has traditionally been a double-edged sword. The same engine oil that is so essential to protecting your engine's internal parts is also responsible for 90% of the ash that is clogging up your DPF and upping your fuel and maintenance costs. Outdated industry thinking still sees a trade-off between engine and emission system protection, and Chevron was tired of it. So they spent a decade of R&D developing a no-compromise formulation. Chevron Lubricants developed a new ultra-low ash diesel engine oil that is specifically designed to combat DPF ash clogging. Delo 600 ADF with OmniMax technology cuts sulfate ash by a whopping 60%, which reduces the rate of DPF clogging and extends DPF service life by 2.5 times. And just think what you can do with all the MPGs you're going to add from cutting your number of regens. But Delo 600 ADF isn't just about aftertreatment. It provides complete protection, extending drain intervals by preventing oil breakdown. Before you had to choose between protecting your engine or your aftertreatment system, and now you don't. 600 ADF from Delo with OmniMax technology, it's time to kick some ash.
And you look at Amazon, they've ordered 100,000 Rivian electric vehicles. Why? The same reason FedEx is doing a lot of electric, because they know their vehicles are driving 100, 150 miles a day, usually the same route, and they come home and they can recharge it at a neutral base. So that return to base is critical. The other thing is they operate in communities. They operate around other stakeholders who have an interest in noise abatement, in air pollution abatement, not just carbon reductions, but all the other air quality, community issues that you may be concerned about. So it really does represent a huge benefit. And FedEx Express is on our board, and they spoke at our last conference. And he said, look, we are committed to reducing our emissions across all of our operations, but we're only going to deploy solutions that make business sense. So in certain markets, we're going to go electric. In other markets, we might go hydrogen. We might go renewable diesel. We might do different things based upon what the use case is and what makes sense for our business. So yeah, I really think that regional last mile, the return to base, the communities in which they serve, and what kind of credit they can get from the affected stakeholders for the efforts they put forth really has a huge influence on their investment decisions.
Long haul, John said, will be one of the hardest transportation segments to decarbonize for many of the reasons we've already mentioned. But it's not impossible. But it's going to take baby steps of progress versus going all in on electric at once. And public policy doesn't favor the slow and methodical approach with its emphasis on zero emissions rather than reduced emissions.
Everyone wants to kind of shove a round peg in a square hole or square peg in a round hole and say we need to go electric. And one of the things we've been pounding away on is the objective is emissions reduction, not electrification. Electrification is a tool. I really think, we can reduce the carbon emissions by going to a more renewable fuel. We've seen huge increase in biodiesel and renewable diesel consumption, largely driven by regulations and credits and stuff like that. But if we can increase the volumetric availability of those products, I think that goes a long way to reducing the emissions. I think we need to understand, what are the options right now. I don't see a lot of options other than liquid fuel and maybe natural gas, renewable natural gas. They're great fuels. Now, the natural gas infrastructure is more mature than electric vehicle infrastructure, but it's still limited. And so you have to really find out what your routes are to see if you can justify that. Had huge upswings about 7 years ago because it was so much less expensive. Then oil prices tanked and it became not as competitive. So the ROI on the investment wasn't there. if oil stays in the $100 range for the next couple of years, natural gas could have a resurgence in terms of its attractiveness because it is a much more stable priced product. And you can still get the power to weight ratio you need. You can really make the ROI play out. The question I have with that is, will the politicians who are so focused on carbon accept that as progress? I mean, my view is huge progress, especially if we're going to use renewable natural gas. Huge progress opportunity there that I think can return on the investment pretty quickly. If we can increase the renewable content of our diesel product, if we can build out the infrastructure for natural gas, bring more renewable natural gas to market, those are the shorter term opportunities. Longer term, I really believe hydrogen fuel cell probably is advantageous to electric, especially for your heavy loads, but maybe a combination of those, as long as the infrastructure builds out, might provide opportunities. But I think that's a much longer play than the renewable fuel side.
The road to zero emissions in trucking may be paved with the perceived successes in the passenger car segment. But what may be obvious to those that are entrenched in transportation, like solutions on light-duty vehicles that weigh about a ton, aren't always viable on trucks and trailers that weigh 40 times more, and those solutions aren't plug and play, those don't really get the headlines.
There's a perception that electrification is being successful, so why not just move it into other sectors? And the word just is, I think, the worst word in English language, because it, one, betrays that the person speaking doesn't understand what it takes to get something done. And it basically just diminishes the efforts of those who are trying to make a change. So yeah, you see a little success, you see some proof points, some proof of concept in the light duty market, and you want to expand it into the other ones. And when you look at the emissions profile of the long haul trucks, I understand it. I understand the desire to address that and make some meaningful changes quickly because there's so much at stake from that sector. But I think it's short-sighted. I think there are opportunities to share technology and use it in certain applications. But as I said before, the number of applications that characterize the medium and heavy-duty fleet needs to be respected and needs to be addressed independently and strategically. Otherwise, we're not going to get the results we're looking for. So yeah, I think clearly you're seeing growth in the electrification light duty market, not to the extent that the media is suggesting. It's much slower, and it's going to be much slower than most of the headlines and reports you're reading. But it is happening. There's a lot of fundamentals that support the growth of electrification light duty market. Those fundamentals are not the same in the medium and heavy duty market. And the sooner we realize that, the sooner we recognize the difference, the faster we can get to finding solutions that make sense and will have a meaningful impact on our emissions profile. Otherwise, we're going to continue spinning our wheel and debating things without making progress.
John hopes the Fuel Institute report shines a light on opportunities in emissions reduction and picks the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, versus chasing gains in segments that may be more complex but make for splashy news.
Regional last mile cargo, it represents a significant share. It's 36% of emissions. The fact that they are in the top 5 applications is extremely encouraging. There's an opportunity here to focus on those two sectors and have a meaningful impact on 36% of emissions. There's so much attention on the long haul. I guess I was a little surprised how much more challenging addressing that might be. But when you dive into the factors that were used to evaluate the ease or difficulty, it made sense. But all the stakeholders I talked to are so laser focused on that sector. I guess I was a little surprised that they had not recognized what a significant challenge it represents. And that's really what we hope this paper does. We really hope this paper opens up our minds and opens up our thought process to look at not just what's aspirational, what do we want to achieve, but identify where's the low-hanging fruit that we can address in a much more expedient and cost-efficient way. And I think the top 5 are among that. And then where are the ones that we need to probably take a step back and take a broader view about what our options are. and see how we can make meaningful progress in reducing emissions in an efficient and sustainable way. Sustainable meaning enduring long term, not sustainable meaning environmental protection, and really get those strategies in place. I think there's a great opportunity here with the top 5, and we just need to really sit back and put the strategic effort in to really address that bottom 5. And in the middle, whatever we do on the top 5, bottom 5, there probably is some technology sharing that can be done for the other categories in the middle. But again, that middle doesn't represent a huge chunk of emissions. So yeah, I guess that'd be, if I had to say what kind of surprised me, that would be it, that there is a huge opportunity that is kind of being drowned out by the statements of those trying to address the more challenging opportunity.
That's it for this week's 1044. As always, you can find the 1044 each week on CCJ's YouTube channel. And if you've got questions, comments, criticisms, or feedback, please hit us up at 1044trucking@gmail.com or give us a call at 404-491-1380. Until next week, everybody stay safe.